our long-range planner for Pitkin County Community Development. I am Zach Hendricks. I am the long-range planning and climate action admin for Pitkin County Community Development. And as many of you have now seen who've attended, I'm just going to quickly walk through how to get to our webpage that contains all our information. If you go to the Pitkin County main website, you'll see a couple buttons, one doing with the pandemic, one doing with the fire restrictions. And all the way down here towards the bottom is the planning, zoning, building button. If you click on that, that will take you to our community development main page. About midway down, there's this big purple button that says growth management public outreach information. You click on that. That will take you to the webpage relating to this public outreach process. On this page, we have all of the data that we've presented and discussed. We have our community benefits table, which we filled out. We have the house size impacts tables. And then also we have recordings of all of the previous meetings. So if you want to go back and watch something, you can go back and see that. I realized I had kind of screwed up the link for the house size one, so that one's been corrected now. So if you want to go back and watch our house size discussion, that is there as well. And then we also have received input from a number of citizens, and we've put that up here. Some of it is in writing and some of it is in video, but if you click on the name, you'll get to see what they contributed. And with that, that is everything I have. I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Hubin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again for being here. And a lot of you have been sitting through a lot of these meetings and haven't really said much. And that's why I was calling a couple people out, asking if you had anything to add or want to speak today, since today we were asking you to actually help us look at all the scenarios that we had proposed and come up with your thoughts and ideas. At the last meeting, we had, I think it was Mona Newton, had asked us to step back and use this meeting today as a chance for people to go back to the material, take a look, and see whether or not you wanted to comment on any of the scenarios that we came up with, or potentially even come up with your own scenario, or support or reflect upon anything that we've already talked about to date. So good to see some of the folks back, and good to see a new face here with us today who knows the code well, and hopefully will be able to be a part of this more. So with that, I don't really have things prepared for today other than to help be a resource. And Zach or Ellen, did you have anything you want to add before we just turn it over to everybody else?
No, I didn't have anything to add. We're looking forward to hearing from you all. And as Cindy said, just acting as a resource and responding and seeing if we can't come up with a good scenario to reflect your recommendations.
Does anybody have a comment and would like to go first?
Anybody brave enough to jump in with your thoughts on the scenarios? Suzanne is always brave. Thank you.
I'm brave, yes. I have a few questions that would further inform my choice. And I don't expect chapter-long answers, but brief ones to remind me of things. Zach, last time you commented on how the new energy saving regulations might affect our housing impact chart. So I think it came from Meg Haynes, her comments about well, what if we introduced all of those energy saving methods, then what would that do to your house impact size? You know what I'm talking about, that chart.
Yeah, so the new energy policy is, in order to be exempt from REMP, which is our energy usage fee, you have to hit a HERS 30. Essentially, that means that 70% of the energy that your house is using is either recovered via efficiency measures or by renewable energy. So you would see a lot of that energy use in that table that I showed substantially less if a house were built to HERS 30. There are a couple caveats on that. First, the average house without renewables, if you are really on top of your game, it is hard to get below a HERS 55. So it's really hard to even get to a 50% efficiency on a home. And the other side of that is the renewables that have to go on. So even if a house is 50% efficient with the scale and houses and the energy that's used per square footage. So a 14,000 square foot house uses more energy per square foot. It's pretty linear on how it goes up, but it still uses more. So even if a 14,000 square foot house is 50% efficient, it still is using substantially more energy than a smaller home.
Okay.
There are a couple examples of residents out there that are net zero, which means they generate all of the energy they use via efficiency measures and renewables. It is an incredibly hard target to hit, and you don't see a lot of them out there. And so that would be where that balance comes in. The efficiency measures can get a long way to reducing their impact, but it can't get you all the way there for the most cases. There will be a few that if you're willing to spend the money, you can get there. It's just very hard to get there. The other side of that is embodied energy is not encompassed in that fee. So concrete, roughly 1 ton of concrete generates 1 ton of CO2. There are some technologies coming out where that number is significantly less and they have net zero concrete. It's not readily commercially available. We're hoping to see it in the next 5 years start to be regularly used. Steel is also a really big one. And typically a larger home uses more of those too. So you get a larger embodied energy usage for larger homes. I hope that answers your question on that.
It does, thank you. And one other question I have, the house size impacts table that has the percentages on it. You remember that one? I have it in my hand, the one that, I don't know how I came up with this one that includes the percentages, but I couldn't find it under house size impacts in the documents that are on the website.
Okay. So the one that I have up there doesn't have the percentages. That was just, it needed some formatting cleanup. So I put the one that I had clean, but I can go ahead and fix that going back. So the one that's up there is just the numbers without the percentages on it. So I'll make sure to fix that after.
Thank you very much. I think that'd be very helpful. And would you also include in the house size, like how the percentages of how much larger 5750 is than 3250 and 8250, even if you just stick it in the corner of that little box?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have that one. I'll put it up there. I just want to make it clear that the percentages are all baselined to the 3250. So the 15,000 one is based against the 3250 in both square footage and in energy use, just so we're not having any confusion on that.
That's great. Cindy, I have another question that you can probably answer, and that is the earlier AACP that worked on balancing the rewards for development of affordable housing over large single family homes or over single family homes. Remind me the year that that was done, and has that kind of balancing remained in place?
I'm not specifically sure exactly what you're looking for. I think the policy within the 93 AACP may have been the one you're reflecting, which basically said that the goal at the time was to have 60% of the community be local community that lived and worked within the community. That 60%, then that was a population number at the time. And then in the, oh gosh, I think it might have been the 2000 AACP, those numbers tried to be we tried to get to numbers versus just the policy. And there was a set number that was set in terms of the goals for development of affordable housing to get that balance going. And the unfortunate part is that we've just never been able to reach those goals in affordable housing. I don't have those off the top of my head right now, those numbers, Suzanne, the specific numbers, but we can get those up. But we've always just seen a greater and greater imbalance as far as those numbers, because the workforce continues to go up, and then the numbers of workforce, and then the people who were here, who were of retirement age or whatever, who have moved out, have sold their free market homes, continue to sell those into the free market, and we've lost employees in that regard. So it's just it's a really tough balance to get to, and we haven't gotten there.
Okay, all right. Well, that answers my question. So I know other people have questions, and then once other people have asked them, I'll go back because I have some more.
And again, everybody should be able to unmute themselves. So if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to just jump in.
Zach, do we have the statistic on the percentage of affordable housing for the population? I thought we had that with Zach's information, but Suzanne, if we were shooting for the goal of 60, I guess the question is, where are we now? And I want to say it's 20%, but I don't recall. So.
And you're talking about 60% of the workforce. The goal of that particular Aspen Area Community Plan, as I recall, was to have 65% living within, of people who worked here living within the urban growth boundary. But we haven't gotten there.
No, we haven't.
Well, do you have any ideas about how this process that we're going through can help rebalance that or get us closer to it?
Well, there have been some ideas that have been thrown out as part of that, one of which is to require, rather than a mitigation in terms of fees, impact fees, to require a buy down of existing units to help balance the existing housing stock.
Let's see. Okay.
That's been one suggestion.
And the ADUs, if more, as I think Bill Sterling talked about Vancouver, BC, what they have been trying to do recently. And I looked at that a little bit this morning, and I think that was, they have a plan called, it wasn't called Move Over, but it was sort of a way to include more employees in the single family home settings where there are large homes now. And I think it was going to reward, they were going to try to, through zoning, they were going to try to encourage, they were going to agree to an upzoning in some of the areas where there are really large houses. So there would be ADUs or backyard cottages and that sort of thing. How do we regulate those now? Who regulates the ADUs? And
ADUs are city. Affordable dwelling units are a term that's used by the city of Aspen, not Pitkin County. We have CDUs, caretaker dwelling units, in the county. Currently, those caretaker dwelling units can only be restricted as far as occupancy and price restriction. They can't be restricted totally to be what we would consider an employee dwelling unit by law. We had, there were lawsuits on that. So all we can really do is say, if you want to build a CDU, it can't be larger than, ours is 1,000 square feet, And if you do rent it, it has to be rented for a certain amount of money, within the guidelines to be affordable. But you could have, use it as a mother-in-law unit or something like that. So right now, those regulations are a little not as tight to ensure that an employee will be living there. One of the things you asked about some other options we had talked about. One of the other things is we had talked about within the urban growth boundaries, upzoning as a possibility, and using the concept of allowing double the density on lots in order to have more of those types of units, but working that out through zoning that might be an overlay or something that could be more restrictive and tighten up the use of those units for the intended purpose.
Does the county reward homeowners who build a CDU? Is there some kind of reward through the growth management system, or that would be an incentive for someone to add such a unit?
Not now, because really it doesn't always turn out to be an employee unit.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Michael, Miracle.
I just want to talk on Suzanne a little bit. I think that the key is you can zone towards an intended use, but unless you've got something that absolutely forces that use, increasingly it doesn't happen. I mean, that's what's been seen with ADUs, is that they're just not used for this idea that, the homeowner would like the, now $2,000 a month and what a one bedroom can rent for. It just like, so the ownership is just doesn't use them like that. So I think it's kind of, unless there's a really hard and fast, you absolutely have to rent it, it goes through APSHA or something, it's very unlikely to happen.
Mm-hmm. It would turn into an Airbnb or such.
Exactly. And that's, the city's now years behind on even, doing anything on regulating that.
Thank you.
Did anybody else think about the scenarios and have any comments you'd like to add or talk about?
Hi, I would.
Mona, hi.
Oh, you're muted, Mona.
You're muted.
Got it. I clicked the video, but not the mute. I wasn't sure if you wanted formal comments, but I'll share with you some thoughts that, you had sent us that piece. And so I think what I and Phi actually did was kind of went through the matrix, the growth matrix that you had suggested. And we made some comments to it, like along climate, just in the various categories, and saying that, that we would agree that, we need to reduce the house size, that you should change the zoning or investigate revising the zoning to increase or encourage density in the right places. And to Suzanne's comments, promoting ADUs that focus on employee housing as opposed to Airbnb. And again, I know it's really hard to try to police all of that, but maybe there's some intent to be able to continue to create that. And I think one of the pieces that I've been thinking about is along the lines of REMP, and what we're trying to encourage is, I think we're trying to encourage beneficial electrification. And so maybe there's an opportunity to require a rent payment if someone decides to put in a new gas line. So there's that disincentive. We don't yet require building electrification if it's a redevelopment or a new development of a new parcel, but maybe there's a rent payment if they're not using, if they decide to put in a gas line. And so we, started moving along in that direction. I think some other things that we thought of would be just, again, I mean, what you're doing right now is thinking about what we want our community to look like. And one of the thoughts that we had, and I'm just going to put this out there, and it doesn't have a lot of thought behind it, so a little nervous in doing that, but maybe there's an opportunity for sort of a 3-county conversation with Pitkin and Garfield, because we're all struggling with Pitkin and Eagle and Garfield, sorry. And maybe Eagle is the most appropriate, especially in our region, along the 82, right? Because, okay, we're not gonna absorb that population that's in Eagle, but we're impacted by the choices that Eagle County makes with their growth and how they manage it. And so I think that, could there be, and this is longer term, you're engaged in this process already, which I think is super important and really valuable. I wonder if a next step might be to have a conversation with Eagle, and maybe even to bring Garfield County in and start thinking about some kind of a 3-county growth management conversation, because that is just swirling around. That topic is swirling around everywhere about how, how do we manage the population that we have with the resources that we have, so that we continue to have the quality of life that everybody wants, and that we retain our environmental values as well, as part of it. So that was just a idea that we had as well. And then I think the other piece was to think about the TDRs and how that works. Maybe you just start, we talked about it last week, you just start with a smaller, smaller TDR, I guess a smaller house size that relates to a TDR. If you're going to build, a 5,000 square foot house, you now have a TDR. So those are some of the thoughts that we had, I think Vi and I had, and maybe she has something she wants to add as well in thinking about and looking at your growth matrix. So that's
Hey,
a lot.
Mona, right? Thank you. But could you clarify the TDR comment? I'm sorry, if you have a 5,000 square foot house, you have a TDR. Did you mean?
Well, you might actually reduce that. I'm sorry, and I may not be using the right numbers. So right now, you have to get a TDR to build a larger than 5,700 square foot house. Maybe you take that down. And I think we talked about it. So it's like a 4,000 square foot house now.
Okay, so reduce the exemption. Okay, reduces the size of the exemption. Okay, thanks.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I can speak energy geek, but I can't speak land use geek too well, so.
Okay, thank you. No, I get it. Thanks. Vi, were you going to follow up on Mona's comments, or is that it for you guys right now?
I think she kind of covered the things that she and I had spoken about. A couple things just I'd like to add for us to keep in mind that there have been comments about people, if we don't allow these larger homes to be built, we won't be attracting, some people may not come that we would like in our community. And I was thinking about that. I thought, we have a lot of big houses already in the community. And so if a larger home may be important to these people, can't they buy something that already exists? Do we have to feel obligated to add more large built housing stock when there's already so much? I mean, granted, they may have to wait to find the house that they want, but so that was just a random thought that I had. And building up what Michael Miracle had said about the ADUs and how they don't tend to be used, or CPUs, I don't know what the possibility is of requiring that if you are building a larger home and you build that additional unit, that it does somehow go into affordable housing management. I thought that was just a really interesting thought, because the whole idea of requiring some additional housing stock, affordable housing stock that goes along with development is, non-subsidized, it kind of creates, that non-subsidized affordable housing stock that is a boon to this type of a community. So, but yeah, I mean, Michael's point that it's impossible to police makes a lot of sense. So,
Please go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Fi. I think one thing that we need to be considering, is that this is a county, not city conversation we're having, and I think a lot of the issues we're discussing would require that the city kind of, get in lockstep with certain policy decisions. And, the city, I know, just to what Suzanne was saying, and sort of, the use of this stuff and, forcing a preferred use. So Suzanne was right that, some of this stuff, if they do want to rent it, it's going to more likely default to short-term vacation rental rather than employee housing. And I think the way to steer us in the direction we presumably want to go, which I think is trying to incentivize use for employee housing over a shadow lodging sector, is going to require real regulation of short-term rentals. So I mean, I think the city had its first work session on this 2.5 years ago, and then I think has just gotten back around to it again, and that they're starting to, I think they've got a registration sort of software system that they're getting comfortable with. I'm actually typing an email to them as I'm listening right now, asking for an update on this. So if anybody actually knows, I'd love to hear it. But then if you sort of say, and this is all possibilities, if you put a cap on what you're allowed to, how many short-term rentals you're going to have in your community, you say, look, okay, first you have to do the registration to figure out how many you have to start with. Then you figure out how many you want, and then if you say, let's put a cap on it, and lots of resort communities are doing this. And you say, we want to. It's a lottery every year. You do it, say, in September, so it kind of works for the cycle of the resort season when there's the highest demand. And then if you don't get the lottery, you have to make a choice. You can either let your place sit empty for the next year, you can use it at your leisure, or personally, or you can rent it to an employee. And I think a policy approach to try to create a choice, you have to get somewhat lucky to turn your house into a lodge when you feel like it. But if not, there are other options for you to make money, and there are more community serving options, like with the housing. So I think there's like within the uses of residential and second homes, there's a regulatory piece that has to be talked about kind of in parallel to this, if we want to see use patterns shift.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Anybody has a comment or question, please feel free to jump in.
Zach, Cindy, Ellen, this is Gail. I started to attend these meetings as a member of the public, and I've done my best to follow along the zoning issues. But that really is your area of expertise, and it's so dense and complex that I feel the best thing I can do for you as a member of this community is to leave the zoning and the specifics of the charts you put up last week to you, but to encourage where you're heading. I think we ended last week thinking which was the best of the three proposals. I've gone back and I've reviewed them. And I still come down believing that B is the best, to zone it like you mean it. Pitkin County has always set themselves apart on leadership and on forward thinking for creating the best community they could imagine. And I think following along with B continues to do that. We're watching again as the wildfires start. Emergency exits are becoming a consideration. COVID, the crowding of the hospitals, the landfill filling up from debris. I think energy considerations in 2020 are the biggest things we can make a contribution to. And the only thing I can add to the discussion of last week is that in item number B, or in Plan B, to actually set a schedule of limiting building permits sounds maybe a little scary. Maybe you let business cycles take care of that. You don't set a limit, because I think people might feel that's stepping too far, but you do zone it like you mean it. You get rid of the concept of 15,000 square foot homes. You cut that back, even consider cutting back the 5750, zone it like you mean it, and let the building permits come in as they come in. Some years might be 60, some years might be 10. I don't think you want to control that. But I just, as a member of the public, want to encourage you to do everything you can in an energy sense. That's why I was hoping to hear from Mona early, because I know her involvement in CORE should help forward this discussion. But that's really all I have to add, and thank you for allowing me to participate in these discussions.
Thanks, Gail. Thanks for spending so much of your time on this and your considerations. Thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, I had just back to the sort of the employee housing. I just a thought, and hopefully these are maybe some of the ideas you wanted to hear. So within the kind of the TDR idea, which is, so we talked last week about TDRs being repurposed for greater community or different community serving purposes. What if there was a kind of a TDR allowance, say the home size does get smaller, and the only way that you can get bigger is if you're willing to build an ADU that you are willing to, formally guarantee will be an employee housing unit. And so, because I think, because I think, some people, this is much more of a down valley phenomenon, do build little apartments that they rent as a way to kind of reach the financial ability to build something and pay for it themselves. I know someone who just did this, Ed Vardy, who's the director of the Farm Collaborative. And, he built a little apartment on a house that, energy efficient house he built in Basalt, and he's renting it at a very fair price. I think he's really doing the right thing. And I wonder if there's a way to create that incentive, which is basically like, okay, we're not going to ask you to do the ADU that you basically use as your rec room. You meet the requirement, but you can use a TDR to go slightly bigger than whatever we decide that the number should be. But you've got to sort of, you got to put it in the APSHA system. Basically, you've got to agree to not have it just be a loophole that you do something else with, and you tick a box to get a few more square feet, and it's for your friends when they come to town. Is that too complicated and like a pipe dream level, or?
I think it ties into what we heard in the community benefits, that we'd rather see direct offsets rather than mitigation through fees. And I think that's directly in line with that.
And maybe nobody would do it, but you know, then that would tell you that nobody ever intended to use these for, you know, the ADU type apartment for this kind of use. You know, if nobody does it, then that tells you that, you know, it was a sort of a pipe dream, you know, idea to begin with.
Bill? Oh, you muted, Bill.
Hi, Tom Newland here. I invite you to take a look at what the town of Jackson, Wyoming is doing. It's very similar to what Michael's talking about. Basically, they give you additional floor area if you're willing to build workforce housing as a part of your house. And that could either be a separate unit, or I believe, or an attached unit. I don't know how it worked out, but a couple of years ago, they put it in place. So it should be, they should have some data about whether it's even viable or not. Tyler Sinclair is the director of community development there, and he could probably tell you about what's going on.
Thanks, Tom.
Bill?
Tom and Michael, you know, this wheel was invented in the 80s, and it was called the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit in the city. And in our so-called wisdom, we did not require that these units be lived in by town workers. And it might have been a mistake not to have been a little heavier with the stick. And of all those that got built, Tom and Michael, probably over 200 approximately, about 50% of them were actually used as housing, you know, affordable housing. There was no limit put on what you could charge for it. It's just that you had to rent to someone who met the eligibility requirements, but it wasn't overseen. There wasn't an inspector to be sure that it happened. And then they dropped it, as you know, 3 or 4 years ago, Cindy, I think they dropped that concept. So it's a proven concept, Michael, you know, and we've used it here in town for 30 years, you know, or more, starting in the mid 80s. And it was another way of adding to the supply of affordable housing on the free market side, just as you were describing it. And of course, pilots lived in them, mother-in-laws lived in them. There were rec rooms, there were all the things you were talking about, but over 50% of them ended up being housing for workers in the town. So, you know, it can work, but it has to be, there has to be a good spirit about it, and it probably has to be a little more rigorous in the implementation of it in the future. Those ADUs are terrific units.
Yeah, so when I moved here in 2005, I lived in one for a year that was a garden level over on Park Avenue. It's not being rented as an ADU anymore. The house sold. We were there for 1 year. I think, you know, 30 years ago and today, there's a very, very different homeowner profile now. You know, people appreciate an extra $1,000 a month in their pocket then. That is, like, dealing with a renter at $2,000 a month is an annoyance for people who can afford these homes now. I mean, people used to mow their own lawns; they don't anymore. And I think it's, you know, like, so I'm thrilled to hear that it did work at one time, and I think it's you know, we just have to say, like, if you want to do it, you're going to have to give it some actually requirement regulated level teeth, that the sort of the tendency to do it is dramatically different today than it may have been 30 years ago.
We just didn't want to be looking out over everybody's shoulder, you know, Michael. We wanted to make people feel more free about it. And of course, they did make themselves more free about it by using it in other ways.
You know, in those days too, it could have been that like what's happening, I think, down Valley, I think the phenomenon further down Valley continues to you know, be at least somewhat consistent with what you're saying. But I also, like, I cannot emphasize enough the degree to which Airbnb has created a second business model that is so effective. It's like crack, that it makes it, you can make the money in a week that it would take you a month to make, so you deal with 2 to 2.5 months of renters. And then, after that point, you're making considerable amounts of money above what you would renting to an employee. And this is why this is a multi-part problem, like in terms of creating the incentive for people to rent to employees, because they've got a far better option just on the pure financial terms if they need the money in the form of Airbnb. At the more recent work session, which this one is, many months ago, if not a year ago now, that the city had, someone came in who was a property manager, and I think she said that she oversaw like 500 of these in Aspen, rooms and this and that. And I promise you I'm paying attention here, but I'm also writing an email to council saying, hey, what did you guys decide? Where is this? Because, it seems like, we've had this giant shadow lodging sector emerge. It's like the equivalent of 7 or 8 Limelights having opened in Aspen. We pull our hair out over hotels, but then we let the equivalent of 8 Limelights open, where people, almost are, like in many cases, have to use their car because they're, all over the place. I think, and it's something that I've said, and I apologize if I'm repeating myself now, but, early on in this process is that understanding the kind of the use patterns of residential and second homes, both, it would be interesting in that impact chart, which I think is amazing, just because it's so eye-opening. If there were how often these places convert into lodging effectively, and like what that does in terms of vehicle chip generation, because as I understand it, Gabe used that Northwest Colorado Organization of Government study that's from 2004, I believe, if not even older, as kind of his principal kind of use generation, sort of impact generation starting point. Again, that predates vacation rental by owner, Airbnb, which is there's a lot of it. I mean, just go on and punch in a home, like look for a home that can accommodate 8 people, and you'll see a bunch of them. And those are houses. So I think, we've got to try to understand the full picture and look at, yes, the zoning is really important, but even, if we would make a kind of regulatory recommendation that would want to kind of live alongside this, I think maybe we would want to consider that too.
So just really quick on the VRBO thing, a few clarifications. So it wasn't until I believe this spring that the state legislature actually permitted counties to license VRBOs. So the county is in the process of figuring out what that licensing process is going to look like, as well as we have licensed with a third-party provider who will be tracking they do it by advertisings. So we will have more data on VRBOs, but considering how new it is, it's going to take us 2 or 3 years to really get data that is of value in making decisions, considering how a home that could be a VRBO one day could suddenly switch back to a residence another day. They oscillate a lot. So I think we will be able to make rational decisions based on that, hopefully within a few years, but that right now it's just really in its preliminary stages, considering that counties didn't have the authority to regulate VRBOs until this spring.
Yeah, Jack, I will forward all you guys and anyone who would want to see it so I can share it with you, and you can share it around. We had now, 3.5 years ago, CU started a master's program called Masters of the Environment. And rather than have the students do a master's thesis, they embed students within a company, and they agree to kind of a mutually beneficial research project. And I had actually asked them to do this kind of study of what's the economy of the valley, like trying to unpack it and say which sector is how big, how many jobs are in each sector, what kind of impacts does each sector generate. That was way too big. So what we agreed to was to dig in on Airbnb and VRBO. And these two students did a valley-wide study. They did the air DNA data scrape for the whole valley. They put together a policy matrix of what's being done in communities all around the country. They produced a white paper. We presented that to City Council. That was 2.5 years ago, and it's decent stuff. You know, these were students. They're not at your level, Zach, Cindy, or Ellen. But I think it would be, you know, it's interesting. It's interesting stuff. So I'll share it with you.
Appreciate that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Please, if anybody has a comment, it doesn't have to be on VRBOs. It could be on house size. It could be on the permitting that Gail brought up. It could be on TDR use, whether growth management is even appropriate still. Please feel free to jump in with all of your thoughts. Suzanne?
I agree with so much of what Gail said about alternative B. That remains my favorite by far above A and C. Some questions that I have about it. Well, one of the things that I liked most about it is the box that calls for a new reduced maximum house size standard. And it's established via zoning applying to all areas of the county. I think that the time has passed for us to dig around in these kinds of issues like house size with a teaspoon or a tablespoon, and that we're now into bulldozer sized changes that we need to make. And so that speaks to my longing for a reduced maximum house size. Then one question that I had about no new TDRs are created and the system is revised. And I understand that the remaining 135 TDRs are still recognized. But before we, in this plan, alternative B, before we just ditched the TDR plan, are there ideas that staff already has about ways that we could use TDRs that lead us to net community benefit?
We do. I'll share it real quick.
Okay.
So I really quickly just want to clarify some of these. We did a public outreach process last year on updating the energy code. So a few of these are from that. I pulled out the ones that there were consensus in the energy group. I think you've heard partial TDRs mentioned a couple times. That was actually an idea that was voted down by the energy group, so it's not included in this list. But they discussed a lot, ranging from how they should be issued. So one idea was that if you agree to build below what your maximum house size allowed is, so for here, I just took the example of 3250 because that's one TDR subtracted from what the current allowed house size is. So if they covenant to only build that, and if they sell the house, it's still there, they're awarded a TDR. So that's kind of the incentive to encourage smaller house size. Another idea was that if they agree to build a net positive house. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the terminology, a net positive house is a home that produces more energy than it uses. So it essentially becomes electrical generation for the surrounding area. It's a very popular idea for taking us off of a fossil fuel based economy. So if they agree to, you could put any number. If they produce 25% more energy than their house actually uses, they're awarded a TDR. So that's an incentive to encourage greater energy efficiency. And then so ideas for uses, we had to increase the density on a parcel in the UGB. This is similar to what Carbondale currently does, where they encourage a second residence on the same parcel. So it increases the density of the area. You get more houses, and it puts it, instead of in the rural area, into the area we've designated as a place where we'd like to see it. Another idea that we were kicking around was that maybe you need a TDR to apply for a VRBO license. So if you want to have a short-term rental, then you need to purchase a TDR because we're getting community benefits somewhere for issuing or severing that TDR. And so that's where you earn the right to become a short-term rental. An idea that the energy group threw out was to convert caretaker dwelling units to guest homes. There's a very large desire on these larger homes. They have caretaker dwelling units, which have to be used for an employee on the parcel. If they give us that community benefit somewhere else in the county, then maybe they should be able to convert that to a guest house. Was a request that we heard from the development community.
Really for yesterday.
And then I'm going to let Cindy explain this last one. As a prerequisite for upzoning, I believe she's referring to building larger, but I'm not quite sure, so I'll let her explain.
Port, which
I
is
just,
the 360-degree
Bill-
video that was shot in the morning by a woman named Lily.
Bill Sterling, we're hearing your other comment.
Hear you.
I just muted him. We're good.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. Go back 2 lines, Zachary, because I couldn't hear you.
To the prerequisite for a VRBO permit?
No, go back to convert a caretaker dwelling unit to guest home.
Sure. So currently, while ADUs are no longer allowed to be built in the land use code for Pitkin County, unincorporated Pitkin County, we do have something called a caretaker dwelling unit. So a lot of homes are so large, they need a property manager or something that lives on the parcel to take it. And the idea behind this is a separate living unit on the parcel that can only be used by an employee on that parcel. I believe I'm getting that explanation mostly correct. I'm sure Cindy will correct me if I'm wrong. But there is a large desire from these larger homes and from the developer community to see an ability to convert these to guest houses. So a lot of people want the ability to bring in families and stuff and have them stay for a couple weeks or whatever. And so they would provide an avenue for them to do that, since we're receiving the community benefit from the TDR itself. And then the last one is the one I'm going to let Cindy explain, the prerequisite for any upzoning.
Right. Hey, Suzanne, do you still want to go over the CDU, the caretaker dwelling unit becoming a guest home?
No. Wait a minute.
It was.
I think I understand that now. I was just pondering, though, the ability to convert a caretaker dwelling unit, which should be covering, we now know because of that house impact chart that the building of that house likely created another job. And so for you to provide a caretaker dwelling unit for the employee position that you created, then you shouldn't have to, I think, use it. You shouldn't be able to use it as a guest house.
Well, of course, it's not that simple. The house, the caretaker dwelling unit is something that an owner would request. It's not their mitigation for their housing impact.
But in fact, it is. In reality, I mean, they may not think that, but we know that now. We know what that house generated in terms of the need for another employee.
I think one way to look at it, sorry if I may jump in, Cindy, I think it's a great point, Suzanne. Like, and if you think about it in terms of, you know, the other impacts within the impact chart, a caretaker unit has the potential to reduce vehicle mile travels because the person looking after the unit is on site. They don't have to drive there. It converts to the guest home. It's probably going to increase vehicle miles traveled, even though it reduces the worker is not eliminated. The worker is just moved into some other, creates pressure on housing somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And then it creates another series of impacts for what those guests do, et cetera.
I agree. Yeah.
Well, maybe the TDR portion of it is just one portion of the solution. Hear me out, and you'll think you're hearing somebody from a different body speaking.
Okay.
This is sort of, if you can't beat them, join them, but make them pay for it. You know, it's one of those. As people were saying that, you know, our caretaker dwelling unit system today, it's an impossible thing to enforce. It's an impossible thing to regulate, you know, out in the field, given the regulations today. So if in fact people want to be legitimate, I mean, if I really wanted to, I mean, we could look in the paper every day and say, oh, look, there's a house that says it has a guest house. Well, not really. You don't have a guest house. You have a caretaker dwelling unit. We don't have guest houses in Pitkin County. So if you really want a guest house in Pitkin County, what should that benefit be back to the community? Well, TDR is one of those things that it could be, and maybe it's not enough. Maybe you buy a TDR and you buy something else to deed restrict in its place. I don't know, but it was a way of looking at what is it that people want. Back in 2000, when people started thinking about, well, what is it that people want? Square footage came out as what people wanted, and that's why TDRs became a square footage commodity. So I know guest houses are something that people want. It's a thought. It's something that I have to agree that with you, Suzanne, that it's not a, it's maybe not a one-to-one here, but it is something that people would probably buy a TDR for. And so that was a thought. How else can TDRs be used? So that's the thinking behind it. It doesn't necessarily, it's not all baked, and it might mean that not only do you use a TDR to convert your CDU that you're actually using as a guest house now anyway to that guest house, or maybe there's more to it. Maybe you also have to give another community benefit along with that, like buy down a unit elsewhere that's not on your property and convert that to a deed restricted unit. So with that in mind, I think you get the point now that that's where it came from. And then as a prerequisite for any upzoning.
But Cindy, if I may, before we move to upzoning, it sounds as though there's some pushback to that concept, and it was one that came out of discussion, and it would be good to hear if people think it's really not a good idea to pursue. We need to know that. So far, you've heard from two people who said maybe not such a good one to pursue.
Cindy has changed my thinking slightly. Just the point that, listen, like, this is impossible to regulate. Like, if you know, it's a way to basically extinguish a TDR, right?
And if we're not getting the use out of it anyway for its intended purpose, legitimize it. But, you know, I'm not fully.
Yeah, I still think that the conversion is, you know, brings impacts that the community is clearly concerned about. But I'll propose, after we get through the last bullet, you know, like, just ask probably some stupid questions about ways to think of repurposing in terms of an impact reduction, sort of through that lens, and what might be possible there.
Excellent.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, a lot of people did not agree with that, so we can continue to talk about that.
Cindy, were you going to do the upzonings?
If you'd like me to, I'll do that now. TDR as a prerequisite for upzoning. We basically used this at the Highlands subdivision, the Highlands development, when it came along. More development was wanted on the Highlands property, and we required that they buy 20 TDRs as part of that upzoning, if you will. So basically, if you're converting something from one use to another higher use, say you're going from a residential to a commercial use, or you're looking at greater density in zoning or something like that, requiring TDRs be part of that. The other concept of don't give away something for nothing. You've got more value in an upzoned piece of property, whatever that might be. So require a TDR or a number of TDRs be purchased to create that upzoning.
Real quick, before we move into anything deeper, Susan Welsh, you've had your hand up for quite a while. Thank you for your patience. Please feel free to jump in and make your comment.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I'd like to hear a little bit more about what Tom Newland said about what Jackson Hole is doing. The other thing, I'm sitting here listening to all these restrictions. We want to restrict people from having maybe a guest house that may, I think that we're becoming a little bit too strict on people. I don't like having 15,000 square foot houses either, but I remember the last time there was a developer, I can't remember who he was, who mentioned that had there been a limit on housing at 6,000 square feet instead of 15,000 square feet, they would have put in twice as many homes. So we have to consider that too, I think. And maybe 12,000 square foot homes would be the limits. And maybe, I mean, I'm not for big houses. I want you to know that. But I hear all these restrictions that we want to make a person do this or that or something else. And it bothers me a little bit. And I think what Gail mentioned, I think she had a lot of good points that she said, zone it like you mean it. And then we could set limits. But I just hate to see all this added on things that you have to do this for that. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about what Jackson Hole is doing. Tom, can you mention that? Could you bring that up a little bit more? Thank you.
Sure. So basically let's say they have an area in Jackson that's a lot like the West End used to be. And all these homes are coming to their useful end and being bought up by very wealthy people and made into larger homes and maxing out basically what floor area you can do in those zone districts. The workforce housing plan allows, I believe, maybe this is just an example, but okay, we'll let you build 1.5 times what you can build in the zoning district if you add a 600 or 800 square foot apartment on the side that will be deed restricted to workforce housing. And they have this action plan. I've got it up on my screen right now that I can send to Ellen or Cindy, that it's a workforce housing action plan from November of 2015. And it talks about that very concept for the downtown area. Now, that's like Michael's saying, that's the city, it's not the county, but the concept is kind of intriguing.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, Tom, I was thinking about that sort of a concept for the urban growth boundaries. You know, our urban growth boundaries around Aspen and Basalt and, you know, even seeing if Snowmass was interested in something right in the area, but we don't quite have the same land use pattern there. But yeah, I mean, that's awesome. Those are the kinds of things we're looking for.
Real quick, Suzanne, John, you unmuted yourself. Did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I had several. Try to do it in some kind of order. I wanted to refer to what Michael was saying about the ADUs. And while I'm sure they were used as intended back when Bill and that council passed those laws, it's pretty obvious that it's not working that way now. And I think the folks that can afford to own these types of properties currently, for the most part, don't need a monthly rent check. In fact, recent news reports I've read about here, Jackson, Vail, I'm sure we've all read them. Properties are being bought up at an incredibly fast rate. And I've seen this phrase in every story I've read, is that the very wealthy are seeking compounds so that they can have their extended family stay with them, which to me, that's the death of the ADU around here. So we're talking about reducing home sizes. And I think two things I wanted to bring up were to do that. I think one way would be to tie in emissions restrictions somehow, because they do emit so much more that they just lose so much more energy than a smaller house. And then I was reading about this city in California called Bolinas, which has successfully avoided being overdeveloped. And the way they did it, which I don't think will work here, but in 71, they put a moratorium on new water permits. And then in 1990, they put a moratorium on sewer connections. And as we all know, we're in Pitkin County's the western half of our county is in severe drought conditions. We're in moderate drought conditions, but drought and forest fires are pretty obviously considerations we should all be thinking about while talking about future development in Pitkin County. Fi brought up the fact that I mentioned last week about how many large homes already exist here and the fact that they can still be built in Owl Creek and Starwood and I'm sure some other places. Is there any way we can research exactly how many 12,000 square foot plus properties there are in the city and county right now? I think that would be an interesting figure to know. I also noticed recently in the airport that my fears were confirmed. Private aircraft use has increased during our recent crises. And lastly, I was kind of on the fence about our choices with I was leaning towards the hybrid, but after listening to Gail speak earlier, I agree with her wholeheartedly on option B. I think Pitkin County's leadership has always been on the forefront with drought and forest fires and the landfill coming to the end of its use. And the elephant in the room that ties all of it together is climate change. Maybe it's time for us to get radical and start taxing private planes in some fashion. I don't know if Pitkin County has the power to do that, but I mean, those people can afford to pay the extra taxes. They want to be here. And that is a major source of our emissions here in Pitkin County. Why not address that head on? Thank you.
Thanks, John, for all your thoughts.
John, I'm part of the airport. I was in that process, and that came up a bunch. And like, I think people were broadly, almost unanimously in favor of trying something like that. And there's very strict rules about what you have to do with the money that you collect as a tax at an airport. It has to basically be used for the facilities in some way. So it could maybe be used to like create a solar farm at the airport or something like that, but kind of to extract from the airport and then spend outside the airport is pretty much impossible.
Well, don't forget tonight, 4 to 7 airport meeting.
Oh God, I forgot. Right.
Dora Hosier, please go. All right. Suzanne was next and then Mona, is that right, Zach?
I'd like to hear from Mona.
Thank you. Well, this is along the airport idea and how we might be able to do some things. So there is a group that has followed up to talk about carbon offsets and creating a carbon offset program. And actually where it's not just looking at the airport, but so maybe not a tax, but starting out with a voluntary offset that folks could purchase that then would be used to pay for something like a solar system at a school or someplace else, or it could also support agricultural regeneration or improvement in our open space. But part of the conversation did come out of the airport conversations, because I too was on the visioning committee for about 1.5 years or whatever it took us. And so that's just one idea, because you're right now we have to use any taxes or monies that were collected right at the airport, which we identified a number of energy efficiency opportunities at the airport. And I think John Kinney was interested in pursuing some of them, but there are some other things that we could pursue, some other ways to reduce emissions, not by the planes themselves, but at the operations. And the GA folks that were also interested in doing that, and they're also interested in this carbon offset idea. So more to come probably from that idea as it develops. And then more recently, we were chatting about some idea of, could you actually expand sort of the airport enterprise boundary? And I see Nina is on here, and I don't know what John McBride would think, but so that you could expand, if you expanded the airport, could then those benefits that if it incorporated the ABC, for example, could the benefits then flow outside of just that little space of the airport? So if we could we put, if affordable housing does get built there, could we then put solar on those units that get built? Or could we put more solar out there at the ABC where it's, you know, it's a perfect spot for more solar on those buildings. So just kind of thinking a little bit outside the box. And I know that the county has the DOLA grant for the microgrid project. So could we kind of maybe I don't know if this might be like a bad word, but rezone the area so the airport has a bigger footprint. Maybe folks don't like that. Maybe the idea is to keep it smaller, but if we expand it, then we can use those benefits in a larger footprint as well. So a couple of thoughts there.
Suzanne, it'll be your turn, but real quick, John, I have the assessor's data. I just did a couple quick crunches for you. This does not include the city of Aspen or Snowmass Village or Basalt, but there are 583 homes that are larger than 5750. There are 159 homes that are larger than 10,000 square feet. And there are 24 homes that are larger than 15,000 square feet in unincorporated Pitkin County at this time. And with that, it is your turn, Suzanne.
I was really, if Susan is still here, I was just going to make a comment about her comments. And that is that, Susan, if you reframe your thinking a bit and you see this, instead of us coming up with too many regulations and that being reducing our freedom one way or another, and instead look at it as we have this vision, and hopefully a shared vision, for what we want this community ideally to be, because of the way it would work and smell and act, and the way it would increase our quality of life for permanent people or part-time people. And then to get to that, it just seems you can't get around regulating to get to the goals that you're trying to reach. In this, it's analogous a little bit, I think, into the issue of wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. There's some people who think that if you have to wear a mask, that means somebody else is cutting in on your freedoms. However, wearing a mask gets us to where we want to go in terms of COVID. So I think regulations are just always going to be with us.
This is fine. I just have to second what Suzanne just said. Unfortunately, I think the capitalistic, structure of our society doesn't support the definition of community, right? That this is a communal, that there's a certain amount of communal resources and shared living and shared lives that we need to be a happy society. And I agree that it just, unfortunately, we have to resort to regulation often to support that, just like with the mask scenario. Thank you.
May I speak up to that? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Susan. All right, Suzanne, I know I sound terrible on this, but I do I know that you can put a moratorium on a city if you don't have enough water and sewer, because up in Carlsbad, they did that for 3 years. And so nothing was built because they didn't have enough water and sewer. However, people still had to pay their real estate taxes, even though they couldn't develop. So that's one way of controlling growth. I guess what I'm thinking, I'm more concerned with how many people we have that keep coming into the county, and we keep building more and more. And I think when we're talking about guest houses, if a person has a big family or they want a guest house, it wouldn't bother me if, as long as he had 160 acres or something like that, and no one else was really affected by it. But so I love to see the backcountry where you don't have these. I don't like to go up to Castle Creek and Maroon Bells when you see all these huge homes. I think it looks terrible. And like I've mentioned before, if you lived in Queenstown, New Zealand, you would not be able to see a home from the road such as 82. They don't allow it. So that's really restrictive if you happen to own real estate. But and Suzanne, I realize that it seems like we're nitpicking and we want to, I think we've just got to come down with, this is the maximum. We're going to zone it like we mean it, and go ahead and do that. Now, I realize I do talk about sometimes affordable housing. We do have 4 projects right now that will be bringing in 1,000 more employees, which will be in town. And the thing that bothers me really is that some of these employees that once they've already worked here, then they keep their properties, and we have to build more and more and more. So that's that much more density. And that's what I don't like is having Aspen at one time was a smaller community, and now we've got 2,000-3,000 more people living in Aspen or in the county. And maybe the airport, that was a great idea to tax these airplanes, these jets that come in. And maybe we could put more employee housing in there. At least that would be something that we would be able to do on that space maybe, and use that tax money. Anyway, I'm one of those who wears a mask everywhere. I don't believe, I'm really not that way. But I just want you to know that there are a lot of units going in right now, which means that they're going to be using water and sewer and everything else. And so just, that was what I wanted to mention too.
I do quickly want to clarify, guest homes are currently not allowed. So that TDR option would actually be an alleviation of an existing regulation. So it would be permitting guest homes in a situation where they're currently not allowed.
I'd like to also say that there is a way to do a guest home without doing a CDU. And that's if you have 35 acres, you can do a accessory structure with bathing facilities. And many of my clients have, not many, but a few have pursued that as their guest home. But by and large, many of my clients, if not all of them, when they want me to get a CDU, it's for a guest home.
Tom,
Did anybody, sorry.
would rather be, do you think that they would rather be legitimate and buy a TDR for that guest home?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Do you think that clients would rather be legitimate and buy a TDR for a guest home and have it, as part of their property asset rather than kind of sneaking around it?
Yeah, I think they would, especially if it could be more than 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, it's a kind of interesting thing as we look at all of this, because I do believe, from what I'm understanding, that's happening is, I don't know who said it, but somebody said folks are looking for the compounds. You know, they're looking for a number of units, not necessarily on large properties, but a number of units on a property. We see it in the city of Aspen. There's an entire street near me that got purchased by one family. And it's, okay, they're Texans, I think. But anyway, it got purchased, you know, for the family because it's an extended family. So they bought the entire street. That can happen in our world today. So, you know, are we looking at a different issue here today that I don't know. I mean, the question's truly there in my mind. Is it something we want to promote or not promote, or allow with, you know, what does that do to the community character? What does it do to our services? What does it do? I mean, they're all questions. I mean, we can never keep ahead of these patterns. It's just what I said last week. There's just no way to outsmart what's going to happen, you know, as far as these patterns are concerned. So, you know, is there anything anybody wants to comment on that? I mean, I think that pattern is occurring.
Cindy? Yeah.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Do you really believe that there is no way to either, I mean, maybe we're a step behind usually, but when you say zone it like you mean it, isn't that a way for us to get to what we really want to act like and be like?
It's true, but I'm not saying it's going to stop the pattern. Like if we say a house can only be 5,000 square feet, then I think what we're going to see is people are going to buy 2 or 3 houses.
It's already happening, Cindy. They're buying subdivisions out in the county for family compounds.
Really?
Even Aspen Valley Ranch.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
And if we do the TDR that forces the ADU to employees, they'll each have a little local mascot, you know, living in the basement.
So it is that time of the meeting where I give Jeffrey Woodruff his opportunity to speak. He's been very patient. So Jeffrey, if you have any comments, please feel free to jump in real quick. I see you have yourself muted.
Come on, Jeffrey.
He might have stepped away from his phone. I'll leave him unmuted and he can jump in whenever he wants. But I realized that we presented all of these possible alternatives for TDRs and kind of moved the conversation on. So I just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to comment on them. One of the things I wanted to include the issuance portion of this is, to put it in perspective, the TDR program has been immensely successful at accomplishing its goal. And I know I said 1.4% left of parcels could still do it. That's actually a wrong assessment of it because I included the land and parcels still in the cities. So there's actually less than 1% of land available that can sever a TDR still. So it's kind of on the way of phasing itself out. So this issuance portion is kind of important if we do want to keep TDRs around going forward into the future, or if we're okay with the 135 that are currently existing. So that's why I included that issuance. And then the uses was to address the questions that we had last time about finding alternative uses for them.
Thanks, Zach.
Can I chime in?
Jeffrey, yeah, Jeffrey's here. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Sorry, Ellen, you first. Okay.
No, I just saw you come on and wanted to make sure we got to hear what you have to say.
So we had mentioned, I guess, a fourth potential. And so I guess my 2 cents on a fourth option is changes to the exemption. So I'm going to go strictly land use, hopefully, with my comments. So reduce the exemption from 5750 to 3250. So reduction in square footage. And the client could get back to 5750 by buying a TDR. So you could still build 5750 all day, but the growth management exemption is reduced to 3250. So that would be the first change, and call it scenario D. For the TDRs, don't change the TDR purchasing power. So for example, right now we have 337,500 square feet of TDR purchasing power, which would be 22 15,000 square foot homes. Right now, I guess I'm arguing leave that as it is. The third point of sort of option D is, bring back the competition in growth management, in the growth management competition, sell it as a way to bring on fractional square footage, so a fraction of a TDR, and simplify the process and the award of the square footage. And my last sort of 3 or 4 bullets are more sort of a reflection on the overall conversation. I think we're landing at a place where we have elephant neighborhoods. So, whether that's Starwood or Red Mountain or the speculative area of Snowmass, those become the identifiable 15,000 square foot neighborhoods, and it's sort of already established. And with respect, I've got 3 more points. With respect to ADUs, if we're really looking to use them as employee housing, then have an exception for the ADU where it sits outside of the building envelope, so that there could be a caretaker or an ADU, on a larger parcel that's away from the family residence. And my last 2 points, I called this proposal rocks, paper, scissors. On the rock side, do not allow building in low to moderate rockfall zones ever. That's just a way to add additional building sites in the county. And my last point is revisit the employee housing impact fee and accelerate the adoption and increase to the employee housing impact fee. Don't wait 10 years to revisit that. Revisit it today in light of this conversation and wrap it into this conversation. Thank you.
Jeffrey, I have one question. Thank you so
Please.
much for being so thoughtful, but you said, well, actually I have 2 questions.
Sure.
You said bring back the growth management competition and fractionalization.
Yeah.
What was the concept on that? What would you do if you got into growth management competition? You would be able to use a fraction of a TDR?
Well, there's a couple things in my comments were based on actually the last working group and some of the feedback we heard. So the direct answer to your question is the beautiful nature of GMQS competition is you literally just buy what you need. But we've seen clients exceed the purchase of what they need because they're gaming the system and they're pocketing square footage. GMQS should be used for a client who needs less than 2,500 square feet. If you need 762 square feet, you should apply to GMQS. So that becomes, in essence, a fractional TDR. And I think that was one of the desires that came out of the energy working group. So does that make it clearer? So you don't need to buy you don't need to buy a TDR, come into GMQS, buy your 762 square feet, but provide an exact, dollar amount that provides the community benefit, almost equal to what you would have paid in the TDR market. Does that make sense?
So basically you're saying if you're somebody who wants less than today's value of 2,500 square feet, you can do that. But otherwise you have to buy a TDR, you're not in the competition.
Yeah, if money's no object and you really need 1,000 square feet or 762, you're overpaying and buying 2,500. But if when we revisit scoring and we revisit the growth management system, the 762 or the 1,000 square foot buyer, if we properly allocate that square footage and extract a community benefit, we should not be doing fractional TDRs. We should be we should be employing the growth management system to satisfy that client's need as well as extracting the community benefit. So I point it out because I don't believe that's the way we're using it today.
Right.
So then may I also clarify, Jeffrey? I'm not sure I heard this correctly. I think you started by saying reduce, were you suggesting that the max house size be reduced from 5750 to 3250 and that someone be allowed to either compete for or purchase a TDR to get up to the 5250 at a at whatever number of, whatever amount of floor area they were trying to achieve? Is that?
So what I was looking to do was a way of extinguishing TDRs quicker rather than reducing the value or the purchase power of a TDR. So I was saying today our growth management exemption is 5750. If that's reduced countywide to 3250, right, to the detriment of a homeowner, we've reduced the growth management exemption by 2,500 square feet. The client can get back to that 5750. They could still build 5750, but they're not entitled to. Does that make sense?
Does that
So
become
we've
a new house max, or is there a
Yeah.
different house max out there?
So I didn't in this conversation. I didn't touch house max.
Okay.
I reduced the exemption from 5750 to 3250, which is closer to the average in the county, and said to the client who still wants to build 5750, you're welcome to, but you now need to buy a TDR.
Great. I have another question for you. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure we're getting everything right, and it might spark some conversation. You said we already have, and you used the term, I think, elephant neighborhoods, the 15,000 square foot neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I think it was option C where we kind of gave that hybrid approach where some neighborhoods would be zoned for the larger home sizes. Is that what your option D includes?
Yeah, espousing the same. I mean, basically, it's also a comment on what we've heard from each of the caucuses as they've come in and said, here's the desire. Whether that's Maroon Castle, with their Maroon with their overlay, or Snowmass. Each of the neighborhoods have sort of chimed in saying this is what we want our individual community character to be. So it's sort of codifying that. It's agreeing with the neighborhoods are basically self-policing in that. And so is there a way we need to formalize that is why I threw it out there.
Cindy, this is Meg.
Hey, Meg.
Hi. I'm needing clarification when you referred to Starwood as the elephant. So are you still saying that Starwood could be designated as a TDR receiver site and there would be a possibility to get up to even 15,000 square feet? I'm not quite clear on how you're thinking about an area like Starwood.
So I'm just reflecting on what we've seen over the last couple of years from each of the caucuses as they've outlined their master plan, that there's areas of the county where larger homes and larger property sites make sense, and there's other areas of the county where the rural, remote nature and character want to be preserved. And they, even though you could have an 80-acre homestead in Capitol Creek, that's not, it's not a 15,000 square foot neighborhood. So I was not promoting a one size fits all for the county.
Okay.
Then Jeffrey, not to hammer, but one question. You had suggested that ADUs, that there be an exception for ADUs to be located outside of the activity envelope for the principal residence so that they could be located with some distance from the principal residence. Is that, first of all, is that what you were suggesting? And then I guess I'd follow up with why should they be, is there just a preference for people to be further away, some privacy associated with the principal residence versus the caretaker residence?
I mean, I guess the thought would have to be grounded in what's the size of the lot. But it's sort of squaring the circle on this overall, the compound versus employee housing unit. And how do we best foster that? How do we best, I'm looking out on Lazy O's caretaker units are generally, accessory to the primary structure. There's not a lot of room on a 40-acre site to then to loosen that restriction. But the thought was, how do we provide? I think it came up in the kickoffs to this session with Steve Child even saying, he wanted to see additional caretaker units, if you will, in rural Pitkin County. So how do we get there? And one option is, does the homeowner are they more amenable to a caretaker unit if it's 4 acres away? And so the building envelope's expanded, and we've expanded the building envelope, if you will, to permit solar outside of the primary building envelope. Is there something else we should be doing to foster that growth or that unmet need, for the employee unit?
Okay, so just to allow for some privacy and distance between the two units as an incentive to build.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, good conversations. Good. Anybody else want to weigh in on anything that Jeffrey said, or any new ideas that you want to, any other people have been sitting out there with their own proposal sort of, or their own option that you'd like to talk about?
Not to pick on anybody, but Grafton, good to see you here. Do you have any thoughts? I don't know that you've been able to be a part of the previous conversations, but anything to add today since you're here?
Not to pick on anybody, but to continue with picking on other people. Grafton, Joe, you've been sitting through all of these. Any comments? Seamus, you've been sitting through all these, listening on behalf of the city, helping us connect the dots with some climate action. Anything that you're seeing that you might want to?
I did see Joe just unmuted himself, so.
Well, let me just say, I have noticed that Seamus has been here all along. Grafton, we hope you'll say something. Marcella, we'll hope you say something. Nina and Joe, yeah.
I would like to follow up on something that I exchanged emails with Zach about, that being the new generation of concrete. Judging from Zach's remarks, I had the impression that we as a community just need to sit and wait for that technology to come along. Zach, could you weigh in about possibly having the community require the use of the carbon reducing concrete, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I think for the best way to address embodied energy or at least the idea that I've been kicking around, would be an embodied energy impact fee. When somebody comes in for a permit, they have to give structural drawings. They have an estimation of how much concrete, how much steel, how much wood, drywall, all of that is going in. And the embodied energy of all of these materials is already known. There's 1,000 studies on all of them. So we can create a rough baseline on it. And that also provides for the allowance of exemptions to certain parts of that. If they can come in and give us documentation that proves that they're using a revolutionary concrete that used no energy in its production, then we should reward that. That's an incentive for them to get out of that fee. The same thing with some woods out there now are actually being grown on a growing process that makes them as carbon sinks. So instead of burning that wood or cutting it down, you're essentially sinking that carbon into a building for whatever the lifespan of that building is. So I think that would, in my mind, that is one of the best ways to address the embodied energy of a building, because it gets both ends of the stick. You're getting the punishment for, I don't know if punishment's the right word, but you're regulating the amount of embodied energy going into a particular project, but you're also providing an avenue for them to innovate their way out of that particular impact fee as well. If they can figure out a way to build as close to a net zero embodied energy building as possible, then they should be rewarded for that. I think that the technology for doing that is very much in its infancy right now, but human beings being human beings, who knows what we're going to invent in 10 years. We could come up with some revolutionary new way of making steel or concrete that allows for that to be a possibility.
Well, the catch of that seems to me that unless it's required, the product's probably not going to be available. So no one's going to get the benefit of using the carbon reducing concrete. So unless it's required, I doubt that it's going to be available.
On the flip side, if we require it and it's not available, that poses a problem as well. But it's a good point, and I think we probably, well, we will certainly consider moving towards some sort of incentive to reduce the embodied energy. And it may be in the form of an impact fee. We don't know yet, but definitely something we need to continue to pursue.
Forward thinking about if we create the requirement, then we help with the demand and we help foster the products that are helpful. So let's think about that as it relates to economy and that sort of thing. Thank
Suzanne?
you.
And Joe Wells, that is exactly what happened with wood stoves and the cleaner burning wood stoves. I think there were maybe 2 that would have qualified under the at that time, the newly proposed regulations on dirty burning wood stoves here. But just as people on the Clean Air Board continue to say, if we ask for it, if we say that that's all you can use here, that industry will come to the forefront. And they did, and it took no time for them to do it. And then because we got attention for doing it, other communities started following suit, just like we are thinking about doing, say, with Jackson Hole. And so it compounds itself. I have a question. How do we now measure the embodied energy in a scrape and replace?
We don't actually have a system in place. Gabe and we have a Michael Porter. I can't remember your last name right now. You have it as Port on your tag, but he's our new construction and demolition analyst. We've been talking. I think he's going to be helping us measure some of that as well. He's incredibly qualified. And hopefully now with our new tracking system as a result of the new landfill policies going in place, we'll be able to start getting a better idea of what those are. And it also varies quite a bit. I mean, a house that has a lot of divertible material. So for instance, the concrete that comes out can be ground down and reused, whereas the drywall cannot. So the embodied energy of those 2 materials being scraped and replaced are somewhat different. So there's still a lot of research going into what exactly that is. And we're hoping to start tackling that problem more head on.
Mm-hmm.
And Suzanne, if you're broaching the topic of what do we do about replacement?
Yeah.
That is something that we identified early on as an issue. You know, those units that are being replaced, scraped and replaced, if you will, are not coming through the growth management system. They already have a development right, so therefore the code today allows those to be redeveloped at the same square footage. They may have to meet new code standards such as setbacks from the waterway or something like that. But it's typically, you know, the new square footage is, I mean, people are using that square footage replacement. So we talked about that several meetings ago. And I think that that might need to be part of our, you know, our package that we take to the board, because it's impacting. It's about, you know, major remodels and scrape and replace are about 50% of our building permits, so that we're not impacting as far as the impacts of growth, climate change, lens, and that factor. So,
and so in that way, we're not presently doing a true accounting of what the impact might be on the community of scrape and replace.
Correct.
and especially relative to the climate lens, we're not, because it's not being taken into account.
I have one more question. I don't know where this got into my head or where I might have read it in your reporting records, the documents, but is it correct that most of the TDRs have moved from the rural areas into the rural areas instead of into the urban growth boundary as we wanted?
And that was not, that was in my mind, an unfortunate change from the original TDR program. And it was a shift from a development right in an urban growth boundary to a square footage that, you know, obviously was very successful, but took place mainly in the rural areas.
Well, I think we need to do something about that. John McBride has argued many times that his thought is that the further you go out from the urban growth boundary, the smaller the houses should become.
Bill, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, just thinking about the bigger picture beyond the specifics of what have been discussed, really some incredibly interesting insights. And the whole notion of what Cindy's referred to a couple of times of the unintended consequences. Already 85% of Pitkin County, and close to that in Eagle, a little less than that in Garfield, is public land. And what the governments have been doing in the valley, with the exception of Glenwood and Garfield County, I would say, has been to set additional limits on growth. And I think the need to do that is incredibly great. And I like this idea of lowering the 5750 down to 3250. We'll never be able to produce enough affordable housing for all those who want to come here. This just the appeal of the small and more remote communities and the more protected communities like the Roaring Fork Valley, Carbondale, Basalt, Snowmass, Aspen particularly. The appeal is unbelievable right now. And the rental market is so volatile. So for example, some old timers want to sell, and they're going to sell for a pretty good price, let's say a couple of $1 million. And they want to stay in the valley, and there's no way for them to stay in the valley because there are no rentals available for them. Rentals are going almost within hours after they're published. So you gain a new member of the community who buys into the existing house, but you lose the two older members. You know, so the whole, it's a constant balancing act. And I think it's terrific that we're really trying to modify the GMQS and the whole process of energy efficiencies and net zero. I think it's a laudable effort that we're doing this, and we should keep doing it. But there are these unbelievable unintended consequences. You can't believe how active this real estate market is right now. It's beyond description. It's It's all happening so fast. So, you know, and so the real estate community is thrilled, you know, but it's not necessarily good for us in the long term, or so good for us in the long term. That's why what we're talking about is so important.
Yes, thank you. And I'm noticing that we've got about 9 minutes left. And I want to get in one word about where we're heading as a staff. We need to take everybody's comments. We need to fill out and refine that matrix where we're taking your comments on these different points back to the board. We as staff need to think about how we're going to package some of what we've heard today as recommendations or leading towards types of recommendations. So that's where we're heading over this next little bit. We have one more meeting with you guys that we agreed to. We are open to more if we can figure out the timing on that, if we need to, but it's our goal, I think, for this next meeting to fill out that matrix with the community, this working group's thoughts about everything we've been talking about. So we'll fill that out and have that ready for you next week to look at, and we'll do our best to put together some of the options we've heard. But I need to caveat everything with what we did in our last working group, which was the energy working group. While Zach and Ellen and I totally respect everything that's been said here, and we will definitely take your comments forward, we may very well come up with a slightly different or a different recommendation as staff to the Board of County Commissioners. I think we said that early on in our conversation, and I just wanted to remind everybody about that the public comment and your comments are going to be taken really seriously. And I think we're going to all be on the same page with most of it. I'm just not sure yet until we put it all together. But I just wanted to once again remind you that it's our staff responsibility then to put together a recommendation that we also feel is where we think the community should be heading, and the board will have everything, all the information in front of them. So just so you know that while your thoughts will be relayed to the board, we may come up with some a different take in the end than what we're hearing here. We don't know yet. I just wanted to give you that heads up.
No, the way I remember it is that you told us if we would take this time out of our lives to get involved in this community process, is that you would do exactly what we say. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I remember that too.
Don't you?
You're scaring me. Yeah, sure. I think we've heard so many good things, and you know, definitely everything's going to be incorporated somehow. So, but I just wanted to say that. And with that, we've got 5 more minutes. I know there's some people that have not had a chance to say anything. And I think we can only determine whether or not we're going to have additional meetings after we pull all this together and come back to you next week.
Real quick, Mona, I saw that you raised your hand. I did just also want to offer, while we are going to try and as faithfully as possible fill out what we've heard, there was a lot said, but we're going to try and fill out that last column of the growth matrix to contain what we've heard from you as a group to be presented to the board. But I have sent that growth matrix out to all of you. I can send out a blank copy as well. So if any of you would like to have a crack at filling out what you thought the group recommendations were in all those categories and submit that to us as well, we will also take that into consideration. And then Mona, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, just really a quick question, and I think it's probably pretty obvious. You have done a really great job of trying to involve as many people in the community as possible and get everybody, and even in this group of 19, to participate and add comments. Invariably, what happens with a public process, and I think we're going to probably see that with the airport tonight, is people who have not participated start adding their opinion, and they haven't participated in these 6 meetings or 14 months at the airport. And so that creates, I guess, some angst for people like me, and maybe for everybody else who's participate. And how do we go forward in a real meaningful way? Because I think we all feel a sense of a bit of a sense of urgency here. I don't know if I'm asking a question, but anyway, I just wanted to state that, I guess. So
I will say that when we did the energy code, everybody that participated, we asked that when we do present to PNZ and when we do present to BOCC, we would love to have you there, both for public comment, but if I have to check with Cindy first, but I'm assuming she's okay with if any of you want to speak for 2 or 3 minutes when we're doing the presentation about the process and what you thought it was as well. We more than welcome that as well. You've sat here with us now for 8 weeks and will be 9 weeks. You deserve to be heard at the end point of this when the recommendations are being made to the board.
And frankly, my experience is that the Board of County Commissioner welcomes your input and participation in that end public process. They certainly did with the energy group that we worked with. So yeah, please, to the extent possible, plan on working with us to the end. That would be really helpful.
John, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to actually go back to Michael Miracle's comment about any taxes taken in at the airport need to be spent at the airport. It seems like a great idea to me. We could have, you know, a solar farm out there possibly. I don't know, but, you know, try to redo the airport with, like we were talking about, the low carbon footprint, concrete, perhaps some cross-laminated timbers to build the structure with. And then as time goes on, use those tax funds to pay for a shuttle system into town, or car charging ports, or maybe even electric cars themselves. I see no problem with using all those airport tax dollars right there at the airport.
And John, there's like, if you go through the recommendation, there's like, it was a huge part of the conversation. There's a lot of good stuff in there, including some of what you're describing.
Cool. I'll look into it. Thanks, Michael.
Hey, and I just asked you a question in the chat related to something not at all related.
Let me check it out.
So anything else that you guys are thinking about? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. We will fill out that matrix and we'll send you an empty matrix. Please fill that out. If you have any comments that you don't see in our matrix. And again, please contact us if you have anything you want to talk about between now and next week. Thank you so much for all your time. This was really a helpful conversation. And stay safe. Thank you.